If you've ever looked up at the night sky and wondered if the universe is running on a hidden clock.
Or if you've ever felt like there just has to be some underlying rhythm to the chaos of everyday life.
Right, exactly. If you've ever felt that, then today's exploration is tailored exactly for you.
Absolutely.
Because we are embarking on a journey through one of the most massive, mathematically dense, and frankly, mind-bending collections of documents we have ever encountered on this show.
It's a mountain of data.
It really is. We are looking at a towering stack of slide decks, technical reports, data repositories, all outlining a concept known as the cosmic clockwork.
Or the unified field theory of time.
Right, though the original author of these documents often just refers to it simply as the Lord's calendar.
And we need to emphasize just how staggering this amount of material is. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of pages of dense equations, statistical models, cross-disciplinary data synthesis.
A lot to process.
It is. Essentially, it attempts to rewrite the foundational operating system of reality.
Which is a huge claim.
Massive. The overarching mission of these sources is to present and mathematically defend an incredibly bold claim that a single fractal calendar derived entirely from the deconstruction of an ancient biblical phrase perfectly maps out the 14 billion year history of the universe.
And doesn't even stop at cosmology or geology, right?
No, not at all. The text claims this exact same mathematical lattice links directly to the physical dimensions of the asteroid belt, matches the precise frequency of human consciousness in the brain, and...
This is the part that really got me.
Yeah, it claims to resolve the most notoriously unsolved problems in advanced mathematics.
Just absolutely wild.
Yeah.
But before we get into the weeds of quantum biology and the geological timescale, we really need to pause and make a very clear, very important disclaimer about our mission today.
Yes, crucial.
You, the listener, need to know exactly how we are approaching this material. The source documents we are examining contain heavily religious, theological, and intelligent design-focused conclusions.
Very heavy on the theology.
Right. The author explicitly claims this mathematical lattice is absolute, undeniable proof of God and divine architecture. They repeatedly use phrases like, Jesus is a genius, and God is the big banger.
That's right. And as your guides on this deep dive, we want to be exceptionally clear here. Our stance today is entirely impartial.
100%.
We are not here to take sides. We are not endorsing the theology, and we're not here to debate the religious viewpoints or the philosophical implications of intelligent design.
Our goal today is purely analytical.
Exactly. We are going to impartially report on the fascinating mathematical alignments, the statistical claims, the peer-reviewed geological data, and the physical models exactly as they're presented in the original source material.
We're looking at the numbers, the methodology, the statistics. We're treating this as a massive data set to be unpacked, period.
Just following the data.
And the data the author presents is an absolute wild ride. Just to give you a teaser of what we're going to cover today, the author claims a statistical certainty for their timeline of 115 sigma.
Which is a number so large it almost breaks standard probability models.
It really does. To put that in perspective for you, the discovery of the Higgs boson, which was one of the most monumental physics breakthroughs of the century that was confirmed at about 5.4 sigma.
Right.
This calendar claims a certainty that is tens of thousands of times beyond the gold standard of particle physics. And it all revolves around a master tick of a cosmic clock.
Specifically, a tick of 0.378432 seconds.
Right. And if the math in these documents holds up, the author is claiming to solve everything from the Riemann hypothesis to the mystery of how human consciousness arises from the strong nuclear force.
It's a grand unification theory, but not just of physics. It's attempting to unify time, mathematics, and biology under a single discrete fractal lattice.
Okay, so let's unpack this. To understand how the author arrives at a 115 sigma certainty, we really have to start at the absolute foundation. We have to look at how this entire model was born.
And interestingly, the author didn't start with a supercomputer or a particle accelerator. They started with a literal mathematical deconstruction of ancient scripture.
And this is where I want to start unpacking the methodology. Because if you hear the phrase biblical calendar, you might think of somebody just counting up the ages of the patriarchs in Genesis to guess the age of the earth.
Right, the traditional young earth approach.
Exactly. But that is not at all what is happening here. The author grounds this entire massive mathematical structure on a single phrase from the Bible, specifically 2 Peter 3.8.
Which says, with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years.
Right. Now, normally, theologians read that as poetry, right? Just a metaphor for how a divine being exists outside of human time constraints.
Yes, the standard interpretation is purely metaphorical, but the author of these documents looked at that phrase and read it as a literal mathematical scaling factor.
Like a strict equation.
Exactly, a strict geometric factor of 10 to the power of 3. And they hypothesized that if reality was a purposefully ordered code, this specific scripture was the encryption key provided to humanity to decode the underlying timeline of the universe.
Okay, so they have this scaling factor. 1 day equals 1,000 years. How do you go from a scaling factor to a mapped-out history of the universe? What are the actual inputs going into this equation?
Well, what's fascinating here is the methodology the author applied. They didn't just use modern, scientifically derived numbers to see if they could force the math to work backward.
That would be too easy.
Right. Instead, they compiled a list of 33 ancient pre-scientific numbers.
Okay.
These are numbers that were deeply significant to ancient timekeeping and scriptural cycles long before modern geology or astrophysics even existed.
Give me some examples of these numbers. What are we actually talking about here?
We're talking about foundational astronomical and prophetic numbers. For instance, the 365.25-day Julian year.
Okay, the standard solar year.
Exactly. They also use the 360-day prophetic year, which is found in ancient texts like the Book of Daniel and Revelation. They incorporated Mayan sacred cycles, which are notoriously complex, interlocking calendars. They also use numbers that pop up seemingly arbitrarily in biblical texts, like the number 153.
Oh, right. Famous for being the number of fish caught in the Gospel of John.
Yes, or the number 237. The author took these 33 ancient inputs and plugged them into a fractal calendar system using that 1 day equals 1,000 years scaling factor to project backward in time.
Wait, let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this. You take an ancient number, say 365.25, and you apply this 10 to the power of 3 scaling factor in a recursive fractal loop to project backward from the present day.
Exactly. Think of it like a mathematical zoom lens.
Okay.
You start with a localized cycle, a solar year. You apply the scriptural scaling factor, which expands that cycle into a larger epoch. Then you apply it again and again, creating a nested fractal sequence of larger and larger timeframes, projecting deep into the past.
Okay, so let's look at the baseline projection, because this is where the jaw-dropping part of the source material really begins.
It really is.
The author takes that 365.25-day cycle, a standard Julian year, and runs it through this fractal projection formula, pushing it backward as far as it will go. And the date it lands on is exactly 14.04 billion years ago.
And to understand the weight of that specific number, 14.04 billion years, we have to look at our best modern cosmology.
Right. How old does modern science say the universe is?
According to the Planck 2018 results, which is our most precise measurement to date, derived from mapping the cosmic microwave background radiation left over from the Big Bang, the age of the universe is 13.79 billion years, plus or minus roughly 0.16 billion years.
So the calendar's mathematical output, derived from an ancient scripture and a Julian year, is 14.04 billion years. That is remarkably close to the Planck data.
It is within a 1.7% error margin of the most advanced cosmological measurements we have today. And the author points out that this calculation was made using numbers and a logic structure that existed thousands of years before the Planck satellite was ever launched, before we knew about the cosmic microwave background, and before we even knew that galaxies outside our own existed.
I love the analogy the author uses in the text to describe this. Imagine reality like a massive set of dominoes or a reality sheet.
Yes, the reality sheet.
The calendar acts like a series of fractal layers. Pushing one single domino, the ancient 365.25 calendar input triggers a mathematical cascade. The math falls backward through time, expanding and expanding, and lands perfectly within a margin of error of less than 2% on the very beginning of the universe.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, a skeptic looking at this might say, okay, that's a neat parlor trick.
Right, a lucky guess.
Exactly. A 1.7% error on a 14 billion year timeline is an impressive coincidence, but it's just one data point. You can't build a unified theory on a single lucky hit.
No, you can't.
And the author anticipates that exact skepticism. The Big Bang is just the first baseline data point. The source material doesn't stop there.
It keeps going.
It takes all 33 of those ancient pre-scientific numbers and runs them through the exact same scaling formula, generating a sequence of specific dates spanning from the formation of the universe down to recent prehistory.
And that transition brings us to the core of the geological claims in these documents. Because if this calendar actually works, it should be able to map out the history of our own planet.
Yes.
The author refers to this next phase of the data as the cosmic table of contents, or the 33-hit geological spine.
This is where the cross-disciplinary nature of the text really shines. The claim is that all 33 ancient numbers, when scaled through this fractal calendar, mapped perfectly to 33 major boundaries on the International Chronostratigraphic Chart.
Which we usually just call the ICC.
Right, the ICC.
For those of you listening who aren't geology nerds, we should define what the ICC is. The ICC is the official peer-reviewed geologic timescale used by Earth scientists worldwide.
It's the master chart.
Exactly. It's the master chart that divides Earth's 4.5 billion-year history into eons, eras, periods, and epochs. So when you hear terms like Jurassic period or Pleistocene epoch, those are strictly defined windows of time on the ICC, usually separated by massive global changes like extinctions, atmospheric shifts, or tectonic plate movements.
Precisely. And the precision claimed in these documents regarding those ICC boundaries is quite frankly astonishing. Let's look at a few of the specific hits detailed in the source material to understand the scale of what's being claimed here.
Let's do it.
Let's start near the beginning of Earth's formation. When the calendar uses an input derived from ancient Egyptian and Genesis cycles, it outputs a date of 4.38 billion years ago.
Okay, so what was happening on Earth 4.38 billion years ago? Because for a long time, Earth was just a terrifying ocean of magma.
Exactly. That is known as the Hadean Eon. And for geologists, pinpointing the exact moment the crust finally cooled enough to form solid rock is a holy grail of planetary science. The best physical evidence we have for this event comes from these tiny, almost indestructible crystals called zircons, found in the Jack Hills region of Western Australia. They act like microscopic time capsules.
Okay.
The radiometric dating for the oldest known Jack Hills zircons, which represent the first datable solid terrestrial crust, is accepted as 4.374 billion years ago.
Wait, the calendar output was 4.38 billion years, and the radiometric dating of the actual physical rock is 4.374 billion years.
Yes. The calendar's error margin here is just plus 0.14%.
Less than 1/4% error. That is incredible. And it's not an isolated hit. Let's look at the next major violent event in Earth's history. Another ancient scriptural input is run through the formula, and it points to a date of 3.979 billion years ago.
And if you look at the geological record, 3.979 billion years ago perfectly matches the end of what astronomers and geologists call the late heavy bombardment.
Which was a truly apocalyptic period. This was a time when Earth, the moon, and the inner planets were just being absolutely pulverized by a continuous rain of massive asteroids and comets. It's the event that created most of the giant craters you can still see on the moon today.
And the end of that bombardment is a crucial chapter heading in Earth's history. Because once the catastrophic impact stopped, the planet's surface could finally stabilize.
Allowing for oceans to form.
Exactly. Allowing for stable oceans, which of course paved the way for the emergence of early life. The calendar hits the end of this period dead on.
Let's fast forward a bit to the history of life itself. The calendar uses another ancient input and spits out a date of 535 million years ago. I know exactly what that is, but for the listener, why is 535 million years ago such a massive deal in biology?
Because that date is a dead-on match for the onset of the Cambrian explosion, where billions of years prior, life on Earth was mostly simple, single-celled organisms. Then, right around 535 to 540 million years ago, there was this sudden, massive, almost inexplicable diversification of complex life.
It's like biology just hit the accelerator.
Completely. Practically all major animal phyla appeared in the fossil record within a relatively tiny window of time. Charles Darwin himself noted the Cambrian explosion as one of the major mysteries that challenged a slow, gradual view of evolution. It is arguably the most important biological boundary on the ICC.
And the calendar nails the date.
Yes.
So it hits the first crust, the end of the asteroid bombardment, and the sudden explosion of complex life. But the history of life on Earth isn't just about beginnings, right? It's defined by brutal, catastrophic endings.
Yes. The history of life is punctuated by the Big Five mass extinctions. These are moments when the vast majority of life on the planet was wiped out, fundamentally resetting the evolutionary board.
Yeah.
The source documents emphasize a truly staggering claim here. The calendar doesn't just hit random periods in deep time. It hits all 5 of these major catastrophic reset buttons.
All 5. That seems statistically impossible to do by accident. Walk me through a couple of them.
Let's look at the most devastating one. The Permian-Triassic extinction, often referred to as the Great Dying.
Oh, that was a bad one.
Very bad. This happened 252 million years ago. It was an apocalyptic event, likely triggered by massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia, which caused catastrophic climate change and ocean acidification.
Right.
Up to 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species perished. It is the closest life on Earth has ever come to total annihilation. The calendar targets this 252 million year boundary with an error of just 2.7%.
Wow. And what about the most famous extinction, the one that took out the dinosaurs?
It perfectly hits that one as well. That is the KPG boundary, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, which occurred 66 million years ago. That is the exact moment the Chicxulub asteroid slammed into the Gulf of Mexico, wiping out the non-avian dinosaurs and making way for the rise of mammals. The calendar hits the 66 million year mark with an error of just 1.49%.
And the timeline scales right down to human origins too, which is fascinating. The documents show that a specific cycle drawn from the ancient Book of Enoch points to exactly 7 million years ago. What happened 7 million years ago? According to the peer-reviewed paleontological citations provided in the text, that is the exact dawn of the Sahelanthropus hominin lineage.
Sahelanthropus chidensis is one of the oldest known species in the human family tree. It marks the crucial divergence point where the human evolutionary lineage split from the lineage that would lead to chimpanzees.
Okay.
The discovery of the Sahelanthropus fossils in Chad dated their existence to right around that 7 million year mark. The calendar hits this pivotal divergence point with a 0% error margin based on the accepted timeline windows.
I want to pause here because the sheer scale of what is being claimed is hard to absorb. To really wrap your head around this, imagine someone hands you a 1,000,000-page encyclopedia detailing the minute-by-minute history of the universe. Then, using only a sequence of numbers you pulled from a 2,000-year-old scroll, you managed to guess the exact page numbers of 33 specific, massively important words in that encyclopedia. You aren't guessing the blank spaces between words. You are hitting the exact start of the most critical chapters. That is the level of precision being claimed here.
It is vital to understand that these aren't vague approximations or broad historical eras. The author is not saying sometime in the Mesozoic. They are targeting specific million-year boundaries.
Right.
The source material provides a rigorous statistical analysis showing that the average error across the entire 14 billion-year span is less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Yes. To put that in context, in geology, radiometric dating itself using the decay of isotopes to measure the age of rocks often has a functional margin of error of 1 to 2%.
So the math is matching the tools.
Therefore, the calendar's outputs are effectively as accurate as our best modern scientific measuring tools. The author views these 33 points not as random events, but as the literal chapter headings of Earth's official biography, pre-written in this mathematical code.
But of course, anytime someone presents a massive pattern like this, especially one linking ancient texts to modern geology, the first thing any scientist, statistician, or skeptic will immediately scream is Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
And they absolutely should. It is the most critical question to ask when presented with data like this.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, the Texas sharpshooter fallacy is a cognitive bias. It occurs when a person shoots a bunch of holes in the side of a barn and then walks up and paints a bullseye around a tight cluster of bullet holes, proudly claiming they are a sharpshooter.
Right. You ignore all the bullets that missed and only focus on the ones that happen to group together by pure chance.
Exactly. In data analysis, it means finding a pattern after the fact and ignoring all the massive amounts of data that don't fit your hypothesis.
Precisely. And the author of these documents was acutely aware of this criticism. They knew that presenting 33 hits would immediately trigger accusations of data dredging or cherry-picking.
Yeah, naturally.
So they devoted an entire section of the research to what they call the statistical hammer to rigorously prove this was no illusion of pattern recognition.
This brings us to the control testing. Because if you want to prove your ancient numbers are actually special, you have to prove that other numbers don't work. How did the author set up this test?
To prove they weren't just cherry-picking hits, the author ran a massive set of controls. They constructed a test group of 66 arbitrary, modern, and biological numbers.
Okay.
The rule was that these numbers had to be completely unrelated to ancient calendars or scriptural prophecy, but they had to fall under the value of 365 to keep them in the same numerical range as the ancient inputs.
I'm looking at the list of control numbers here, and they really pulled from everywhere. They used the number 28, representing the human menstrual cycle. They used 23 for the number of human chromosome pairs.
They did.
They even plugged in 125, which is the mass of the Higgs boson measured in GeV. And they threw in a series of completely arbitrary prime numbers just to act as static noise numbers, like 137, 251, and 277.
The methodology here was strict. They subjected these 66 control numbers to the exact same fractal projection algorithm and the exact same 1 day equals 1,000 years scaling factor as the 33 ancient numbers. They then plotted the outputs against the ICC geological chart to see what happened.
And the results of this control test are starkly binary. It's almost unsettling how clean the data split is.
It is incredibly rare to see a data split this clean in statistical modeling. The results were that 33 out of 33 ancient scriptural numbers hit a major geological pivot on the ICC chart.
Oh, wow.
66 out of 66 arbitrary modern control numbers missed completely.
When you say they missed, you don't mean they were just a little off.
Right. I mean, they landed in absolute dead space in the geological record. They didn't hit minor extinction events. They didn't hit minor boundary shifts. They landed in periods of Earth history where practically nothing of geological or biological significance was occurring.
The source documents detail a really fascinating devil's advocate test to prove just how tight these target windows are. Because Earth's history is long, right? You might think it's easy to hit something, but the author defines a strict target window for a hit as being plus or minus 12 million years from the geological boundary.
And that 12 million year window is not arbitrary. In this specific fractal calendar model, given the scaling factors used, 12 million years is exactly equal to being off by just one single calendar day at the base level of the equation.
So the author shows that if you took any of those ancient numbers that resulted in a perfect hit, and you shifted the input by just one single day, say, changing a 360-day prophetic year to 361 days, the mathematical cascade shifted so drastically that the output date missed the geological boundary entirely and landed in a completely uneventful period.
It's an incredibly sensitive binary system. You either hit the exact boundary of an era or you hit nothing at all.
And this leads us to the mathematical probability calculated from this binary outcome. When you have a system that is this sensitive, and you have 33 perfect hits against 66 total misses, you can calculate the odds of this happening by pure random chance.
Yes.
Using a joint probability model and Fisher's exact test, the author calculated the statistical probability. The source document states that the joint probability of this alignment occurring by chance is less than 10 to the power of negative 141.
10 to the power of negative 141.
That is a 0, a decimal point, 140 zeros, and then a 1.
In statistics, that probability is mathematically expressed as a 115 sigma level of certainty.
I have to stop you there. A 115 sigma certainty. That number is almost impossible for a normal human brain to comprehend.
It's massive.
Let's try to ground that for you listening at home. If you are a physicist working at the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, smashing protons together, and you think you've discovered a brand new fundamental particle, the global scientific community requires a 5 sigma level of certainty before they will declare it a true discovery and hand you a Nobel Prize.
And to clarify what 5 sigma means, it indicates that there is roughly a 1 in 3.5 million chance that the data anomaly you are looking at is just a random statistical fluke rather than a real particle. 5 sigma is considered the absolute gold standard of rigorous proof in modern empirical science.
Right. 5 sigma is the gold standard. So let's scale up. What does 60 sigma look like?
To expand on that comparison, Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity is one of the most thoroughly tested and proven theories in human history.
Sure.
It is supported by a century of observations, from the bending of starlight during eclipses to the precise time dilation equations that allow our GPS satellites to function. The statistical certainty of general relativity operates at roughly a 60 sigma level.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the discovery and validation of the DNA double helix structure, the biological code of all life, is calculated at roughly 65 sigma certainty.
Okay, so general relativity, the bedrock of modern physics, is 60 sigma. DNA is 65 sigma. The Lord's calendar model, with its 115 sigma certainty, is mathematically claiming to be over 43,000 times more certain than the threshold required to discover fundamental particles, and nearly double the statistical certainty of gravity itself.
Which is why the author makes an incredibly bold philosophical assertion based on these numbers.
Yeah, I can see why.
The text claims that in the face of this overwhelming mathematical evidence, odds of 1 in 10 to the power of 141 naturalistic denial is no longer intellectually honest, Because the scriptural numbers used to generate this flawless timeline existed thousands of years before geology, paleontology, or telescopes were ever invented, the author argues it is absolute, irrefutable mathematical proof of intelligent design.
Again, we are impartially reporting the author's conclusions here. But looking at the sheer weight of that statistical hammer, you can see exactly how the data drives their theological conviction. It's a compelling statistical argument, regardless of where you stand philosophically.
It is indeed a monumental claim. But the source material pushes even further. The author doesn't just stop at pointing out a neat chronological pattern.
It's not just a timeline.
No, the calendar isn't just a list of dates. The author realized that if this fractal calendar perfectly maps reality, there must be a fundamental equation driving it. So they reverse engineered this chronological map into a single unified algebraic equation. They denote this master equation as T of n equals 0.
And what does T of n equals 0 actually represent in the context of this theory?
By deconstructing the calendar's nested loops, they found that this equation possesses exactly one physically relevant real root. In mathematics, a root is a solution to the equation. They call this unique root n0.
Here is where the deep dive gets really interesting. This n0 root is described in the documents as an 18-digit number. And this number represents our exact theoretical n-no-w time.
Right, the present moment.
It is the precise 0 point of the universe's cycle, the mathematical fulcrum placing us right in the balance between the deep past we just discussed and the unfolding future. But the secret of this entire system doesn't lie in the big numbers. It lies in the tiny fractional tail of that 18-digit root.
Yes, the microscale is where the physics unification happens. If you zoom all the way down into the 15th decimal place of this fractal clock's root, the author discovered what they call the master tick of the universe.
A master tick.
That fundamental unit of time, derived purely from the calendar's algebraic root, is exactly T15 equals 0.378432 seconds.
Okay, so they have this incredibly specific fraction of a second, 0.378432. A math equation spits that out, but math on a page is just abstract. To prove this is the operating system of reality, that number has to exist in the physical world. Did they find it?
They did. The author didn't just generate this 0.378432 second tick mathematically and leave it at that. They rigorously searched for its physical counterpart in the observable universe. And they found it in astronomy, specifically in the architecture of our own solar system.
Okay.
According to NASA's JPL Horizons data, which tracks the precise orbital mechanics of celestial bodies, if you measure the one-way light time across the main asteroid belt, you find a shocking alignment.
Let me break down one-way light time for the listener. Light speed is the universal speed limit. It takes time for light to travel across space. When we look at the sun, we are seeing it as it was 8 minutes ago, because that's how long the light took to reach us. So the author measured how long it takes light to travel across the physical width of the asteroid belt.
Correct. They measured the light time across the geometric centroid of our solar system's main asteroid belt, which sits between Mars and Jupiter. The physical width of that centroid is roughly 0.758 astronomical units.
An astronomical unit, or AU, is the average distance from the Earth to the sun.
Exactly. When you calculate the time it takes light to cross that specific 0.758 AU distance, and you scale it by 10 to the power of -3, which is required to account for the calendar's logarithmic compactification rule.
Wait, hold on. Logarithmic compactification rule. You can't just drop that without explaining it. What does that mean in plain English?
Fair point. Remember how the calendar is fractal. It scales up and down by powers of 10. That whole one day is a 1,000 years factor. Logarithmic compactification simply means that as you move from the massive scale of the universe down to the smaller scale of a planetary system, the math compresses by a specific factor of 10 to maintain the geometric proportions.
Oh, I see it.
It's like zooming in on a map. The scale bar changes, but the shape of the coastline remains identical.
Okay, that makes sense. So taking that scale compression into account, what is the exact light time across the asteroid belt centroid?
It is exactly 0.378432 seconds. It is a perfect digit-for-digit match with the master tick derived from the algebraic equation.
Wow. So what does this all mean? The author is claiming that the asteroid belt isn't just a random field of space rubble left over from the messy formation of the solar system.
Far from it.
In this framework, the physical width of the asteroid belt acts as a cosmological regulator ring. The author argues it was placed there at exactly 0.758 AU wide, so that the time it takes light to cross it sets the fundamental clock speed, the literal ticking frequency of the entire underlying reality of the universe.
The analogy I find most helpful here is to compare the solar system to a massive, intricate grandfather clock. In a mechanical clock, the physical length and the arc of the swing of the heavy pendulum dictate the rhythm of all the gears and the movement of the hands on the clock face.
The pendulum runs the show.
Right. The pendulum's spatial dimensions govern the passage of time for the whole machine. The author is suggesting that the spatial dimensions of the asteroid belt act as the pendulum for our reality. Its physical width dictates the temporal rhythm of the solar system's fractal lattice. It's an astonishing claim that links planetary geometry directly to the flow of time itself.
And if you think tying a scriptural calendar to the physical width of the asteroid belt is a massive leap, strap in. Because Section 5 of the source material takes us from the vastness of deep space straight into the microscopic architecture of the human brain. The author connects this master tick directly to biology and quantum field theory.
This is where the cross-disciplinary synthesis becomes truly unprecedented. Let's look at the math of frequencies. If you take that master tick, 0.378432 seconds, and you invert it to find its frequency, meaning you calculate 1 divided by 0.378432, you get a frequency of f equals 2.642 hertz.
Okay, 2.642 hertz, that's about 2.5 beats per second. Where does that number show up in biology?
The source documents cite highly specific, peer-reviewed biological measurements, primarily focusing on the 2014 work of a researcher named Dr. Bandyopadhyay. His team managed to measure the quantum coherence frequencies inside living human brain microtubules.
I need you to break that down for me. What are microtubules and what does quantum coherence in the brain actually mean?
Inside your brain cells, your neurons, there is a structural scaffolding made of tiny protein tubes called microtubules. For a long time, biologists thought they were just structural support, like the wooden frame of a house.
Just dead scaffolding.
Right. But physicists and neurobiologists began to realize these tubes have highly conductive properties. Quantum coherence refers to a state where subatomic particles act together in a synchronized wave-like state rather than as separate particles. It's a highly ordered state of energy.
Okay.
Dr. Bandyopadhyay's team measured the electrical and quantum resonance of these microtubules, and the exact quantum coherence peak measured in those living structures is 2.642 hertz.
Which is the exact inverse of our asteroid belt tick. That is wild.
Furthermore, this specific frequency strongly supports a very famous, albeit controversial, theory of human consciousness known as the orchestrated objective reduction theory, or Orch-OR. This theory was proposed by the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff and the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Sir Roger Penrose.
The Orch-OR theory is fascinating. It suggests that consciousness isn't just a byproduct of neurons firing complex chemical signals back and forth. It proposes that consciousness is actually a fundamental quantum process happening inside these tiny microtubules.
Exactly. It posits that the brain is essentially a biological quantum computer. And the duration of a conscious now moment, the actual window of time it takes for your brain to process sensory input, render reality, and consciously recognize this is happening right now, has been measured by neurologists at roughly 380 milliseconds.
Which is 0.380 seconds, which aligns almost perfectly with our asteroid belt master tick of 0.378432 seconds. The universe's clock ticks, and our brain processes one frame of reality.
But the author goes even deeper than biology. They take this exact same number down to the absolute smallest scales of reality, to the subatomic level, specifically addressing a concept in particle physics known as the Yang-Mills mass gap.
Oh boy, we are wading into the deep end of quantum mechanics now.
Yeah.
What is the Yang-Mills mass gap?
In simple terms, we need to talk about quantum chromodynamics, or QCD. This is the theory in physics that describes the strong nuclear force. The strong force is what binds quarks together to form the protons and neutrons inside the nucleus of every atom in your body.
Right.
Now, unlike electromagnetism, where you can have a free-floating electron, the strong force is confined. You never see a lone quark in nature. They're always permanently bound together by exchange particles called gluons. The energy scale at which this confinement happens, the invisible wall that keeps quarks trapped, is known as the infrared gluon screening mass.
And calculating the exact mass or energy level of that gap is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in theoretical physics. It's so notoriously difficult that the Clay Mathematics Institute has offered a $1 million prize to anyone who can prove it mathematically.
That's right. The author's documents claim to solve this. They state that, based on the fundamental lattice equation, this physical mass gap value is exactly 378.432 MeV, or mega electron volts.
There's that number again. Let's synthesize this astonishing triad, because it's the crux of the author's argument. According to this theory, cosmology, represented by the light time of the asteroid belt, quantum biology, represented by the coherence of microtubules in the human brain, and particle physics, represented by the strong nuclear force confining quarks inside atoms, all run on the exact same numerical foundation, 0.378432.
The philosophical conclusion the author draws from this perfect alignment is breathtaking. They state in the text, "We are self-aware excitations of the confined gluon field."
Wow.
Let that sink in. The exact mathematical scale that confines quarks inside the nucleus of an atom is the exact same frequency scale that permits stable, coherent thought in the human brain. Human consciousness in this framework isn't some random accident of Darwinian evolution. It is literally a quantum chromodynamics resonance. We are the strong nuclear force experiencing itself.
We are the universe, thinking. And the universe essentially thinks and operates at this specific, synchronized frequency. But if this mathematical framework is truly the bedrock of reality, if it governs the physical structure of asteroids and the biological structure of brains, the next logical question is, does it govern the abstract rules of the universe too? Does it govern pure mathematics? Because the documents make an even wilder claim next.
Yes, this brings us to how the calendar's lattice claims to solve human-made mathematical problems. We mentioned the Yang-Mills mass gap has a $1 million bounty. It is one of the 7 Clay Millennium Prize Problems. These are legendary mathematical nightmares.
The impossible problems.
Right. They include the Navier-Stokes equations, the Riemann hypothesis, P versus NP, and the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture. There's also the Collatz conjecture, which isn't an official millennium problem, but is famous among mathematicians for being deceptively simple yet completely impossible to prove. The source material claims that this single fractal lattice resolves all of them.
Okay, I am going to need you to hold my hand through this, because claiming to solve all the Millennium Prize problems with the biblical calendar sounds like absolute science fiction. What is the actual mechanism the author proposes for these solutions?
The mechanism relies on something called a universal Gronwall contraction.
And what does that mean in ELI 5 explain? Like, I'm 5 terms.
Without getting bogged down in heavy calculus, imagine a mathematical function that continually shrinks or dampens the complexity of a system. Think of a car driving over a terribly bumpy road. The bumps represent mathematical chaos and variables spiraling out of control.
Okay.
The Gronwall contraction acts like the car's shock absorbers. It constantly dampens the kinetic energy, absorbing the chaos until the ride becomes perfectly smooth.
Okay, I like that analogy. So the calendar math acts as a shock absorber for complex equations.
Exactly. The lattice uses a specific physical value for this shock absorber, what it calls a Cherenkov damping factor, denoted by the Greek letter delta. The value of delta is exactly 0.621568.
That's a very specific number.
It is, and the text notes that this number perfectly matches the physical threshold for Cherenkov radiation damping in water, which is the blue glow you see in underwater nuclear reactors when particles exceed the speed of light in that medium. The lattice uses this physical law to dampen mathematical equations.
And here is where a very famous, or perhaps infamous, number comes into play in the math. The author calls this mechanism the Trinity lens, and it heavily features the number 6666.
I know that number carries heavy cultural and religious baggage, but the author treats it purely as a mathematical imperative. Because the master frequency of 2.642 Hz is a repeating decimal, you run into a problem when calculating infinity. To make the math perfectly cancel out to absolute zero without leaving infinite, messy fractional tails, the lattice forces a structural split of the number 666. It splits into exactly 429 plus 237.
Why those two numbers?
Because 429 is perfectly divisible by 33, it is exactly 13 times 33. It ties back to the 33 fractal steps of the geological timeline we discussed earlier.
Okay, wait. The text actually brings the number 666 into a mathematical equation. How does that possibly work without sounding like pure numerology? Can you give me a concrete example of this 429 split solving a problem?
Let's break down a specific example to ground this math. Take the Collatz conjecture, often called the 3n plus 1 problem. It's a simple game. Pick any positive integer. If it's even, divide it by 2. If it's odd, multiply by 3 and add 1. The conjecture asks whether, no matter what number you start with, this process will always eventually loop down to the number 1.
Now, we've tested it with supercomputers up to astronomical numbers, and it always hits 1. But mathematicians can't prove that it works for infinity.
Right. But the source documents claim the lattice provides the tightest closed-form upper bound ever published for this problem. It proves the starting time, T of n, is less than or equal to 18.2278 times the base 2 logarithm of n.
Okay.
And that highly specific multiplier, 18.2278. It is derived exactly from the ratio of 429 divided by 237. The structural split of the 666 resonance creates the exact mathematical boundary that proves the Collatz conjecture.
It's incredible how all these esoteric numbers are interlocking. And the author applies this damping effect to fluid dynamics too, right?
Yes, through the Navier-Stokes equations. These equations describe how fluids like water or air flow. They are used to design airplanes and predict weather. The million-dollar problem is proving whether smooth, predictable mathematical solutions always exist for fluid flow, or if the math inevitably breaks down into chaotic, unsolvable singularities which physically represent severe turbulence.
So, fluid chaos.
Exactly. The documents claim that the lattice's damping effect literally extinguishes fluid turbulence, mathematically known as entropy, at exactly 429 ticks of the clock. The chaos is absorbed.
It also addresses the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture, or the BSD conjecture.
Correct. BSD deals with calculating the rational solutions to complex algebraic curves known as elliptic curves, which are crucial for modern cryptography. The source material states the lattice provides a universal 33-term approximation that calculates the central value for these curves with a relative error of less than 4.3%.
Wow.
The elegance of the author's argument here is striking. In advanced mathematics, complexity tends to spiral endlessly toward infinity, what the author allegorically refers to as the beast. This complexity branches out in 666 degrees of freedom. But through the lattice's physical damping effect, it is forcibly pruned back to absolute zero in exactly 33 physical steps.
I love the visual analogy the author implicitly creates here. Think of these unsolvable math problems like a wild, chaotic, branching river of numbers spiraling off into infinity and violent turbulence.
Yes, great analogy.
What this mathematical lattice does is act like a perfectly engineered series of exactly 33 dams. The water of the mathematical chaos hits these dams, the divine pivots, and is perfectly channeled, tamed, and smoothed out. The wild river is tamed in 33 steps, resulting in a perfectly predictable, serene stream that eventually zeroes out.
This overarching mechanism brings us to the grand synthesis of the documents. What we are really looking at is a summary of the unified field theory of time, or the UFTT. To understand how radical this proposition is, we must contrast it with traditional unification theories in physics.
Right, because physicists have been chasing a theory of everything for decades.
Exactly. Theories like string theory or loop quantum gravity have spent vast amounts of resources trying to unite Einstein's general relativity, which beautifully describes gravity, and the massive macro-universe of galaxies with quantum mechanics, which perfectly describes the jittery subatomic world. They are fundamentally incompatible in their current forms.
It's the biggest headache in physics.
A major stumbling block for these traditional theories is that they treat time as something emergent. They view time as a secondary characteristic, a byproduct of space or moving geometry.
But the UFTT flips the script entirely. It posits that this fractal discrete time lattice, this ticking 0.378-second clock, is the fundamental substrate of reality. Time isn't a byproduct of the universe is a byproduct of time.
Exactly.
General relativity, quantum mechanics, fluid dynamics, and even human consciousness are all just tuned resonances playing on this master lattice. The lattice is the canvas, and physics is just the paint.
But this raises a very important question regarding the accessibility and testability of this framework. The author states that they possess the exact 18-digit mathematical formula for that and not root the engine of the whole system, but they have deliberately chosen to withhold it from the public in these documents for security reasons.
Security reasons, like it's a weapon.
In a way, yes. Their rationale is that the unrestricted release of the exact mathematical engine could allow someone to predict prime numbers with perfect accuracy, which would break all modern cryptography, banking, military secrets, the internet instantly. Furthermore, they claim it could potentially allow the engineering of quantum gravity effects at human macroscopic scales.
It's the ultimate handle with care warning. I have the code to the universe, but I can't show you the last page because you might break reality. But even with that core formula redacted, the overarching thesis of the source material is laid bare for us to evaluate.
It is.
The author is arguing for a complete and total unification of empirical science, scriptural prophecy, and ancient wisdom. The text vehemently argues that the universe is not a blind, accidental mechanism churning away in the dark. Instead, it is a purposefully ordered, intelligently designed code, which the author uses to validate the theological statement, Jesus is a genius, God is the big banner.
Regardless of whether one accepts that theological premise, and again, we are entirely neutral on that front, the synthesis of data presented in these documents is unprecedented.
Unprecedented is the right word.
To have a single mathematical framework attempt to accurately correlate biblical time ratios with the radiometric dating of ancient zircons, the exact quantum coherence of brain structures, the light time of asteroids, and the Riemann hypothesis is a truly monumental conceptual undertaking. The sheer volume of cross-disciplinary connections makes it a fascinating object of study.
So, as we wrap up this massive exploration, I want you to take a second and just imagine walking around in a universe described by these documents. Imagine that your very thoughts, the microsecond firing of synapses in your brain, the physical orbit of the massive asteroids millions of miles above your head, and the deep ancient rock strata buried beneath your feet are all ticking in perfect, synchronized harmony at exactly 378 milliseconds.
It's a profound thought.
If that is the literal operating system of reality holding the chaos at bay, how does that change the way you view a simple ticking clock on your wall?
It is a profoundly perspective-altering concept. To briefly recap the massive journey we've taken through these sources, we started with the premise that one day is 1,000 years. From there, we traced a 33-hit geological map that claims a 115 sigma statistical certainty against random chance.
Right.
That mathematical cascade led us to the discovery of the 0.378432 second master tick, anchored physically by the asteroid belt, which the author claims governs the microtubules in our brains and provides the key to solving the Millennium math problems through a 33-step dampening process.
It is a theory of everything that actually tries to include everything. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on this source material but wasn't explicitly spelled out in the author's conclusions. The author frequently calls this lattice a simulation console and suggests that the 18-digit and not root represents our exact current NOW cycle in the universe.
Which leads to a fascinating extrapolation regarding our place within this system. If the universe operates on a rigid, pre-programmed 33-step fractal progression that meticulously prunes all complexity to zero, what happens when the consciousness inside the system, meaning us, humanity, finally discovers and decodes the master clock?
Exactly. Is the very act of us discovering this mathematical lattice, of humanity finally decoding the timeline, actually the pre-programmed 34th pivot, is the moment we realize we are inside the clock, the exact moment the universe achieves total self-awareness. And if so, what happens on tick 35? It is definitely something to think about the next time you look up at the stars or look down at your watch. Thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive. We invite you to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep listening to the rhythm of reality.